Welcome to CAFFE Strategies' first annual celebration of World Creativity Innovation Day. After a year of pandemic-induced lockdowns, there couldn't be a better time to appreciate our creative potential. And the United Nations is doing just that. They are marking 2021 as the International Year of the Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. Now, there may not be a universal understanding of creativity. The concept is open to interpretation in the context of economic and social and sustainable development. Therefore, the United Nations has opened up April 21st as a World Creativity and Innovation Day to raise the awareness of the role of creativity and innovation in all aspects of human development. Creativity and innovation at both the individual and group levels have become the true wealth of nations in the 21st century. The creative economy is the economy we all should be paying attention to because it's limitless. But creativity is affected by culture. And that's why CAFFE Strategies is coining the new term, intercultural creativity. Culture is an essential component of sustainable development and represents a source of identity, innovation, and creativity for the individual, the organization, and the community at large. At the same time, creativity and culture have a significant non-monetary value that contributes to the inclusive social development, to the dialogue and understanding between peoples. The wealth of nations is within your intercultural creativity, and I'm excited to bring to you today top thought leaders that are making an impact and leaving their mark around the world. But today, they're taking a pause to be here with us. Now let's bring them to the stage. Hey, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Genein.
So I'm going to do just a quick introduction of you all, and then we're just going to get into this important topic and do our part on World Creativity Day. First off, the word means hustle. Hustle means different things to different people, but for Justin Colella, a successful serial entrepreneur, it's the commitment to make every human being and make sure they have access to basic human rights. His organization, Hustle for Humanity, is focused on defending all civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights set out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He is global, and he's here with us to share his thoughts on the state of intercultural creativity. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Genein. Thanks for having me. This is an excellent event you put on. Just to give a quick introduction, Hustle for Humanity, yes, is a 501c3 nonprofit human rights organization. We have chapters in several different countries, growing almost about 26 or 27 now. Basically, we like to say in one sentence, we're like PETA, but for humans. People for the ethical treatment of humans, perhaps. PETA stands for People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. We're saying, why don't we treat humans ethically? Then we can move on to all of nature from there. But our overall mission is basically, as you said, to protect and promote the civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights set forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But we want to simplify and conceptualize those down to the most basic principle where we can get everybody on the planet to agree that every single human being with a pulse, everybody that's breathing, should have access and be provided with what we call the 5 fundamental human rights. So that would be food, water, shelter, education, and healthcare. We think that's, if we can get everybody to at least start to agree with that, then we can move from there. Because people say that people deserve life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, but water is an essential to life. Water is life. So food, water, shelter, education, healthcare. If we can start with that, then we can move on to all of the 30 in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all of the Sustainable Development Goals. So that's just a quick intro for that.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'm so excited to what you're going to add to the discussion today. Next, we have someone who always tells me, choose your own adventure. This is advice from futurist Bian Li, founder of the global organization, The Hungry Lab. Her entrepreneurship training programs are 30 different countries around the world, and she's here to drop some futures gems during this timely discussion. She's an entrepreneur, a global speaker, an award-winning leader, and a former investment banker. Her Hungry Lab turns students and startups into architects of sustainable regenerative economies. Welcome to the Innovation Day panel, B.
Thank you so much for having me, Genein. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to learn from fellow panelists and share my insight as well.
Awesome, awesome. And last but certainly not least, we have the just amazing person who is here to show us about adaptability. From commanding the stage with President Obama, Richard Branson, and Jessica Alba, he's coached top entrepreneurs and advised heads of state around the world. Dan Ram, as we call him, is an international voice on living a creative, adaptable life with purpose and passion. He's a thought leader on the adaptability quotient, so you're going to talk about that, and a global voice for us with the top skills, strategies, and tips to living a creative, joyful life with purpose. Welcome to the show, Dan Ram.
The part you missed on the introduction is I'm a huge fan of what you do and the conversations you create. So I am very grateful for this opportunity and to be part of this panel here. So thank you. Excited for this new terms we're coining, but more importantly, the conversations that hopefully will inspire and excite people to push forward.
Awesome. Well, that's just the first question. You know, the concept of intercultural creativity is not new, but I'm just bringing it together. Culture, how we live, how we see each other, and creativity, this value bringing of new possibilities. What does intercultural creativity mean to you in the work you're doing now? Anyone could go for that one.
I'll jump in if you want. I would say intercultural creativity is going to give us the idea that we can all have a diversified world where we can create a new world. Now, we say with Hustle for Humanity, one of our taglines is join us in creating a better world. But how are we going to do that? There's a lot of organizations that are going to say things like that and quick taglines, but we have to start with some basic principles. So we have what we outline, basically our guiding principles. We call them the 5 meritocratic principles necessary to create an equal opportunity for every child. If we're going to create a new world, we're going to have a diversified world, we need an equal opportunity for every child. Now, those 5 meritocratic principles are: 1, no nepotism. It's not who your parents are, it's who you are. 2, no cronyism. It's not what others can do for you, it's what you can do. Number 3, no discrimination. Sex, race, religion, age, background are irrelevant. Talent is everything. Number 3, equal opportunities. You start from the same point as everyone else and you go as far as your talents take you. And number 5, rewarding merit, the highest rewards for the highest achievers. Those are the principles that we adapt internally with Hustle for Humanity, and we would love for everybody in the world to kind of adhere to in all 195 countries. Thank you.
I love that. If I can say, where you have clear objectives and deliverables, to me, where the term is a lot more human and personal level. And I love that. And I'm excited already for this panel because it obviously brings so many different sides to it. For me, because I work with individual people, what that term means to me is truly seeing people, hearing people, being with people, feeling with people, the uniqueness in who they are valuing their opinions, their views, what they bring to the table, appreciating it, acknowledging it, including it, with the belief that together we're better. And together we also step into the uncomfortable, but the uncomfortable creates the next. And so I don't think the term that we're talking about here is necessarily palatable or comfortable. And I'm saying that's great. So creativity by itself, that process can be quite confusing and scary for some and can be really exciting and liberating for others. And I think we need both. And it's same with intercultural conversation, diversity conversation, inclusion conversation. Some people thrive in it and some people are like, I don't want it. And you put all this together, and I think that tension is exactly what we need more of. But the real question is, how do you do it well? And I know we're going to get there with the conversation too. But yeah, to me, if I distill it, it's just being able to look at someone and go, I see you, I feel you, I hear you. You're part of this conversation. Together, we're better. Let's go.
And for me, in terms of creativity, how I would look at that process, it seems like it's also symbolic and an outward reflection of the evolution of the human condition itself. Like as we as a society transform and evolve, that output is shown through the creative process. And that really defines how we want to go forth in the future, is the meaning and the stories we tell ourselves. And that is actually sort of, if I could put a word to collectively describe this global shift that is occurring in terms of the future of work and the intersection with the future of education and learning, it's putting meaning into and redefining the meaning that we want for the future that we want to create. Are we beholden to the strict paradigms of the past that have gotten us into trouble and gotten us to where we are today? Or can we break free from that and mold something that is much more inclusive, brighter, better? And that requires a whole new level of creativity in terms of how we redefine and how we think about the meaning of our lives. And so when we look at the intersection between the future of work, the future of learning, it's almost joined by the future of being. And it's, making, minding, and meaning is really the confluence of all of these various factors that are helping us move forward in this shift together.
And I love the fact that you brought up that we are in a shift, and especially this is the week, April 21st, and yesterday was a very monumental day in our nation, and you guys can talk about that if you wish. But looking at the shift and looking at redefining the definitions, we're going through the pandemic. 2020 was just last year, and that will be a time that will live in history for our nation. Mm-hmm. Defining creativity, defining intercultural competence, defining what it means to be educated, and defining what it means to be in a place of true potential. I know, B, you have spoken on my podcast. You all have been on my podcast. Thank you very, very much. But you talk about the difference between resilience and regeneration. And I feel like this shift is looking at what that difference means for you. Could you explain that? And then our other two panelists can give their thoughts about it as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk. Obviously, resilience has been a big theme, especially during COVID and coming out of COVID. And I'd like for us to take one step further. Resilience is important, but it implies an inherent acceptance of the status quo. That, okay, every time you get punched, you get back up. Okay, but why can't I reinvent a world where I don't have to get punched, right? And so that is that concept, then taking resilience to regeneration, and that resilience is not enough because the status quo is what got us into trouble. And now, so how do we come out of it healthier, thriving more, and being able to actualize our talents and our capacities and potential in a more inclusive and in a more accessible manner. And so that is where I make that connection. And that's why it's important to also bridge that gap and say, hey, it's not enough just to get up. Okay, now how do we build back better? And how do we become and blossom better from this experience?
I love that. Resilience versus regeneration. That's so perfect. It's so memorable too. And I also remember at the very start of the pandemic last year, there was a lot of conversation about perseverance, double down, lockdown, like let's just fight our way through it. And one of the things that I think everybody picked up on very quickly is the rules of the game are changing. And so then the question is, how do you win a game where the rules keep changing? And the focus for me then became, why not just be the best player you can be in the game? So if you don't know the game you're playing, focus on being the best player. And then the question is, how do you do that? And that's where I love the term regeneration. I think what I've been calling it is just adapting. How do you evolve? How do you adapt? Because if you keep holding on to who you were or what the world was, that is how you go extinct. And so that's why I've been pushing hard. I love IQ. I love EQ. I love all that stuff. And I've been thinking, how do we start encouraging people to adapt better? Because even before the pandemic, if you look at what's happening politically in the UK and the US and all of that, it's society going, things are moving too fast, slow down. I live in a little tech bubble where I'm all about, yes, the future is exciting, but that's not everybody's experience. And so how do we help people say it's okay to let go of your expectations? It's okay to let go of who you were last week or last year. It's okay if the world is not what you wanted it to be or what it was promised to be. How do you adapt? And so I actually think intercultural creativity comes into that, because I believe one of my superpowers to adapting is both the intercultural aspect and the creative aspect. Now, there's many, many, many ways you can adapt, but as a son of an Indian diplomat, growing up every 3 years in a brand new country, in a world before Google and Instagram, where you could just go on Pinterest and see Zimbabwe. All right, what does that look like? Now I know what to expect. Now you just show up and you figure things out. So to me, just understanding how the world is so complex but beautiful in its complexity, and seeing the same situation, multiple perspectives, is a way to adapt. Because if you've only been raised one way, to see a situation one way, that's how you approach it. But if you've been raised in Africa and in Europe and the Middle East and in Asia and North America and South America, all of a sudden you go, there are so many ways to look at the same problem. So I think the intercultural aspect is absolutely necessary. But as a musician, my favorite kind of music is jazz. I was raised on classical music, and so I know how to play a piece exactly as it was intended to. But where I find myself and my unique sound is when I play jazz music, because you improvise. It is an extension of what you feel on the inside. And that is a form of problem solving. That's what problem solving is, creativity. So to me, the question that was asked and this topic that we have are directly connected, because to me, regeneration and adaptability come from an appreciation of interculturalism, appreciation of creativity. You put the two together, your AQ raises. I'm still yet to do the PhD on this, but catch me up in 4 years, and I'm sure I'll make that connection tight.
And I'll do the reading.
Great.
I'll be your thesis advisor, your thesis chair.
Yeah,
Yes,
if I
please.
could just pick up what Dan said, I love what he said about jazz and the fluidity of it all, because and that essentially is what intercultural creativity is. It's an active, conscious choice to apply empathy on an ongoing fluid basis. And that is ultimately at the heart of how we create something that's better than what we've created so far. And to be able to have those diverse perspectives and to have that active empathy. And empathy is also not something that is stagnant. It's fluid. It is contextual. And it's important for us to understand context. And even though context can be seen as complex by many people, it's not. It's actually quite simple when you bring it down to the basics of what unites us and what makes us commonly human and what everybody wants. And so for that, I think it's important for us to sort of redefine what complexity is, because I think we tend to make things that are unknown to us more scary, because we tend to play it up more as complex in our mind when it really doesn't have to be when we strip it down to its actual parts.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And if I could just jump in, I think it's good that we can all recognize that we're in a new world now, right? The old world, we're in the post-COVID-19 world. And I think we should adapt that as soon as possible as an idea globally, because the old world was what we can term hyper-capitalism, right? I mean, it really comes down to a system of growth at all costs. That's what we were dealing with. We were dealing with corporations that would have to increase profits every year. And if they didn't increase, they thought they were losing money. That's kind of an insane idea, because that's what damaged the people on the planet. So sustainable development is the new world. This is the new plan for 2030 and for 2050 and beyond. But immediately those goals will be established, hopefully by 2030. But that's to say, we're going to develop in a sustainable way where we're not damaging the people on the planet. Even Fortune 500 companies are starting to recognize that if they don't adapt in this century, if they don't within the next decade or two have a social or environmental impact, they know in their boardrooms they won't exist. Pepsi won't exist. Coca-Cola won't exist if they don't have a social or environment impact. If it's just profit, if it's just marketing, if it's just greed, it's not going to work. So we have to transition from this world of greed to a world of life. We can even call it greed versus life. Socrates way back said over 2,500 years ago that the definition of good is knowledge and the definition of evil is ignorance. Now we can expand upon that today and say, yes, the definition of good is knowledge and the definition of evil is selfishness, ignorance, and greed. And what we've seen from a lot of these corporations that have been destroying the planet and a lot of people whose mindset has been unlimited growth at all costs is nothing but selfishness, ignorance, and greed. And in US politics and many other politics, we've seen people who embody that identity. And so that's given the world a perfect example of what not to be. So now we're going to have to transition to that. And that's going to be hopefully globally done, thankfully, with the help of the United Nations that's now signed on 193 countries and regional and state governments to carry that out.
you guys are all bringing it together. And that brings me to the next concept that I was looking at, of skills versus attributes. In looking at how when things are defined, when the path is laid out, you can really work on your skills. But when things are murky, when you don't really know what the future looks like, now people are relying more on attributes. So the attributes of courage, the attributes of adaptability, of creativity, of being able to connect the unconnected, and know how to look at, puzzles versus mysteries, and what did the mysteries entail? What are your thoughts of, because I know several of you guys are leaders and you've done training, you've done curriculums, you've really laid out these programs. What are your thoughts on the training of the world with the concept of attributes, even though they're not as clearly defined as skills are?
Oh, can I jump in on this one? Because this is like the easiest question you've asked today so far. The other two questions were tough. So here's the deal. My team both love me and hate me for this. I repeatedly say this. I can always teach you what to do. I cannot teach you who to be, right? You either are that person or you're not. And so in my company, I hire, I don't know, every 2 to 3 weeks, someone new. We're growing fast. It's exciting. But I always find great people. And then I sit down and go, how do you add value to the company? Let's talk about that openly. And then my team have to then spend an additional couple of weeks trying to figure it out, because I can teach people how to do social media. I can teach them digital skills. I can teach them development. I can teach them engineering. And nowadays there's so many ways to learn as well that I don't have to put them in college for 4 years if they don't want to go. There's so many other ways to do it. You can teach them all that stuff. But like you mentioned, courage, creativity, empathy, being a good leader. And I mean a good leader, not someone who just commands and directs, but is present. I can't teach that stuff. Someone who makes eye contact and really cares about you. I cannot teach you how to do that. So I certainly hire by attributes, not by skills. All of my interview questions are all about the person, not the skills, because I firmly believe that you can teach people skills. That said, and I also point out where I think the greatest gap in education is globally. I have yet to be in a school that teaches you self-awareness. I am yet to be in a school that teaches you personal development. I'm yet to be, and I speak in endless schools I've studied and graduated from some of the top universities in the world, and I've never taken a class in this stuff that I think is so important on mental health, on awareness, and all of this stuff. This is a massive, massive gap. And again, coming back to things like AQ and evolution and adapting, regeneration, these terms we're using, it's not coming from biology class or math class or physical education. It is coming from the personal development. How we do that, I think, is going to be the key differentiator between great citizens of the planet or just continuing to copy paste the old model of we're just going to create people for certain jobs. Jobs are necessary for the system. The system is necessary for our existence on this planet. And we're realizing that whole paradigm out. We've something new. So those are my thoughts on attribute versus skills.
I think for me, skills, to echo what Dan said, skills are teachable. And well, oftentimes people, especially students that we've talked to, and so many, they all around the world, they think the attributes are fixed, but attributes are transformable. So oftentimes we're too stuck with the labels, especially in schools. We need that checkbox. Oh, this person is gifted. This person is special needs. This person is, this, good at this, bad at this, da, da, da. And these labels, these stories that we end up internalizing from what other people tell us we are good at or what we are bad at, that ends up becoming our identity, not necessarily who we are, but who we think we are because of what we've been told. And we end up making different meanings because of it. So if I'm told that, oh, I'm dumb because I'm bad at taking tests my whole life, because the metric is tests, right? And then I internalize that. And I've seen across the board, so many students internalize that and think that is their attribute. They think that their attribute is, I'm dumb at math, right? But when actually it's not. They don't hate math. They just are not good at the way they were taught it, right? But if they explored and were able to take another way to teach it, or there was another more creative way that suited that student's natural attributes the best, not the internalized attributes, then we would see them being able to come out of that internalized negative label and blossom. And we've seen that through and through. That goes back to that self-awareness point that Dan made. If we allow people to teach them how to be self-aware and understand themselves more versus internalizing the label that is given to them due to lack of self-awareness, then we would be in a much more advanced stage of learning and much more actualized place in terms of allowing students to harness their own potential and unleash that. So I think we need to be very careful in terms of how we talk about attributes, because a lot of times what people think are fixed or what people are born with are not actually the true attributes of that person.
Absolutely. And I mentioned this on Genein's show last time, is I think that it's always been my belief that everybody's a genius in their own regard. We just have to identify what that genius is and give them the nurturing they need in that category. But if we go through life treating everybody, to fit in the same box, or like the old education system of the old world would prepare everybody for a world that no longer exists. So we were telling people for the last 2 generations to go to school, go to college, get an MBA, get a master's in business administration, go work for a corporation. You'll be able to retire. You'll be able to have stock options. And that world just doesn't exist anymore. We're looking at cities like Los Angeles or New York or San Francisco, and it takes like an income of $200,000 a year net to even like rent a decent apartment in West LA, or in San Francisco, it's even more. So though there's not jobs available in that market anymore. So we have to teach people a new way of doing things. We have to teach them to become self-employed. And there was a great quote by a philosopher one time who said, action is the true measure of intelligence. But it's not only action, but it's action and the ability to adapt to change. So we have to teach people to be adaptable to new different worlds, to be able to lose their business and open a new business, to not, there's people that have lost entire wealth categories. They've lost entire industries, have gone under, and they have to be able to adapt. And that's the true entrepreneurs that are out there. But we also have to teach people to not look for a master, to not look for a corporation or a paycheck. A lot of people would be deathly afraid to not have a paycheck come in every week or every 2 weeks, to not have a set hourly wage or a set annual income. We have to teach them to free their minds from that, to not be a slave to the system. And that's what hypercapitalism has done. It's taught people to be just as smart enough to run the machines and operate the computers, but not smart enough to create their own. And so we're going to transition that in the new world. And we also have to get them past the idea of tribalism. We have to get them towards the idea of community. If the community rises up, we rise up as a species. If you look at the attitude of the most selfish people on the planet, the most greedy people on the planet, let's call them the super class, the 6,000 people who have the billions and hundreds of millions of dollars. Their attitude is screw everybody else, take care of yourself and your family. Then you talk to the average person and they say, screw everybody else, take care of yourself and your family. And when everybody has that attitude, we lose as a species. So we have to get everybody looking out for all of us. We have to all come together and make sure that we can all grow. That's why we're going to see community co-ops. We're going to see corporations that run as co-ops. We're going to see all kinds of new forms of capitalism rising up. It's going to be almost, think of it as a system of, the thesis would be, let's say, communism of old, right? Like an equal starting point and an equal outcome. Well, it doesn't matter how hard you work because no one gets ahead, right? It's just equal starting point and equal outcome. Then there's hypercapitalism, unequal starting points and unequal outcomes. Some people start with an inheritance of $413 million, like the last US president. Some people start with nothing, or they start in debt. And so, of course, there's unequal outcomes. We have to merge those two. We have to have the thesis of, let's say, communism, the antithesis of hypercapitalism, and then the synthesis of social capitalism, where we take the both ideas of the little ideas of communism, but the best ideas of socialism and the best ideas of capitalism, and fuse them together in a new system. So where we have the best ideas of socialism, the best ideas of capitalism, and everybody will have an equal starting point and an unequal outcome. But everybody will be guaranteed those basic human rights, that food, water, shelter, education, healthcare, the ability to have 10,000 hours of training in their chosen expertise field provided to them. If they choose to go into art, they'll have 10,000 hours of art provided to them, of training in that. If they want to go into engineering, if they want to go into medicine, we're losing every generation. How many Da Vinci's in cubicles are we losing? How many people are we losing to the best, brightest minds that are forced to work in factories or forced to work and hit sales quotas and type up TPS reports? The new world is going to identify those people and nurture them and help them make a better world for all mankind.
There's so much there, and I see Dan Rams. I see your wheels moving, man. Yeah, there's a quote that I heard. He's like, today's best minds are sitting somewhere thinking how to get people to click on clickbait. It's and that got me. Did anyone want to respond to Justin's comment or statement?
I'm just wondering how controversial to go with this. You're the host here, so I don't want to take over.
Well,
but
I'm in a position where we need to break down walls and tell the truth and justice. This is the week of truth and justice. So whatever you feel like you need to share, because this is the dialogue and no one knows the right answer. We are trying to feed interculturally, learn from one another to hopefully get to some truth and some justice for all.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear your views on this too, Genein. So your questions are amazing, but I also want to hear some of your insights and learnings on this. I'm picking on the two things that were said on this topic, and I'm combining them together, about labels and making sure we get rid of those labels and own who we are, and also about fusion, which Justin was talking about just now. And one of the things that has struck me on this topic of interculturalism is it possible that everybody is right and everybody's wrong? Everybody has truth and everybody has false. And what I mean by that is not saying that a certain attribute is better, or a certain attribute is worse, or a certain culture is right and a certain culture is wrong, or a certain mode of creativity is the right way and a certain mode of creativity is the wrong way. And is it possible to see good and bad, right and wrong, that duality constantly? And is that healthier than a model for a singular model for growth or for sustainability or for anything, and saying we all got to get on the same page? And I'm just spitballing live here, right? Because as you guys were talking, I was just thinking about that. And it's going, I often fall into a world of frameworks. Here's the 4 steps. Here's the 5 ways. Here's the 3 things to do it, because it's simplified. But I'm wondering if the real solution is not that simple. And we go, okay, manipulation, that attribute is both good and bad, because if you use your power for manipulation in the form of persuasion, it's a positive thing. If you use it for selfish gain, it's a negative thing. But the attribute is the same, someone who is salesy can be seen as a negative attribute. It's a form of manipulation. But someone who is a visionary, who is infusing others in self-belief to do something, like Justin is talking about, is visionary, right? But it's a form, like the word language ability it's a similar skill set. It's just how you use it. So the same thing is good and bad. And the same thing with cultures, right? When I look at some of the very complex issues in the US, I know I may come across as American, but I live far, far, far away from the US, and I've only spent 4 years in college in the US. So for me, it's very interesting as someone who cares deeply about this country, but it's quite distant from what's happening there, to see that these issues are complex. There's right and wrong in every aspect of everything that is happening. No one's got it right. No one's completely in the truth. These things are very complex issues. So I'm spitballing here based on what you guys are saying. Are we saying that intercultural creativity and problem solving and building a better world, is there a framework, a singular path that we just need to get on board? Or is there in the simplest form, a duality of good and bad, right and wrong, true and false at the same time with everything? And probably it's even more complex, that there is a equal appreciation for everybody and everything as is, believing that celebrating all is better for all, as opposed to celebrating one or right. And for you, Justin, that would also then mean, this is the controversial part, that what drives billionaires to become rich could actually be beneficial for the world. So it's not about removing their billionaire status, but maybe harnessing whatever attributes they have that got them there, even if it is handed over family wealth for good, because someone else with a different set of attributes with that kind of platform power or influence would not be able to do what that billionaire does. That's where I was again like, oh, sometimes it's easy to like pigeonhole some people or certain roles, or even factory workers. I think factory workers are necessary. Now, factory workers against the will, not necessary. But if whatever with the will is in that situation is maybe helpful, we're 7-something billion people on this planet. Not everything can be artisan created and individually curated. At some point, we do need production at mass levels and people who think along those lines to be able to help our planet. So that's just a lot of brain dump thoughts as you guys were talking. That's neither here nor there. Just honest, like live thinking about what you guys are saying.
Excellent.
If I could sort of touch on what Dan just said, to answer your question, from my perspective, yes and no. Speaking of duality. And so the thing is, I think you touched on the heart of intercultural creativity needs to be allowing for duality, allowing for people to open their minds and their hearts enough to be able to think in that way. Because that's not how we teach in school people right now. That's not how the workforce is designed. It's linear, it's box, 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 box. And if you don't fit in, you're given a pill, you're ostracized, something, right? And so, and not to get all metaphysical, because touch on quantum science, but there's no such thing as base reality, right? This 7 billion people, 7 billion realities, right? It's about the meaning that you take. Thoughts become feelings, feelings become actions, actions become your personality, personality becomes your reality, right? Mm-hmm. And so, when you can't have even a base reality, then and we've seen that in the various conspiracy theories and the explosion of cancel culture, and so when you have this very dichotomized way of looking at it, the world becomes black and white, and it's not. And that type of thinking is what has gotten us into trouble. So I think the creativity of shaping our minds starts with the neuroplasticity to be able to allow for this duality, right? That is at the heart of it. If we cannot allow multiple dualities, I mean, if you look at the math, it actually supports the fact that we actually live in a simulation, right? So, not to get, that's neither here nor there. But so if you look at it, the fundamental question is, how can we nurture creativity in a way that allows for acceptance of duality and a curiosity for curiosity's sake? A lot of times when we talk about intellectual freedom and academic freedom to think about ideas, a lot of times now there's a lot of fear because of cancel culture. I can't explore this because I'm going to be labeled XYZ and then canceled, right? Mm-hmm. And so without it, if we just automatically write people off, we fail to absorb and allow for commonality. And without commonality, we don't have empathy. And without empathy, we can't move forward in a better way. And we'll just becoming more and more entrenched in our own circles and our own echo chambers, and further away from reality. So that is, I think, the key question that you hit upon, Dan, is that can we allow for a way to instill this type of acceptance of duality, of multiple realities, and make that a key emphasis of how we teach creativity and how creativity can be learned and absorbed. And so that also begs so many other questions that I don't think we'll have time for today, but it's just this, it's absolutely fascinating.
And if I could jump in on 2 points, that was excellent, Bian. So speaking to what Dan said about people, I don't think it comes down to anybody being right or wrong or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I like his take on that. It's always been my belief also that everybody's trying their best. Everybody's doing what they think is best for the world. Sometimes many of them are hypnotized. I've been doing hypnosis for like 17 years, so I jokingly say that. But in reality, everybody is kind of hypnotized into their own thought patterns, into their own meta programming. Whatever forms of stimuli they had growing up, whatever schema they experienced became their belief system. And many of those people believe that they're doing something to create a good world, but they may be completely wrong. Now, what do we know about the world is that progress is good, but progress is controversial, right? Like when slavery was the norm, it was controversial to talk about ending slavery. So today it's controversial to say things like water is a human right. Okay. But 50 years from now, we're going to be laughing at how silly that was. 10 years ago, when we were talking about how healthcare is a human right, we would get hate mail and death threats. Now today, there's at least a few Facebook groups saying it. Okay. So now other organizations are safe saying it. So we have to always be pushing the needle forward, regardless however many of the masses are there yet. They will get there, and that's what we need. We need the top thought leaders in the world always pushing that needle forward, because if you look at the world 100 years ago, it was hell compared to how it is now. And if you look at the world 100 years from now, it's going to be significantly better. Think about some of the stats. Like 100 years ago, most people didn't have running water. Many people died during childbirth. Women couldn't wash their hair. They didn't have shampoo. They used egg yolks. People would starve to death. I mean, it was just really, really bad. People didn't have central air heating. I mean, nobody, if you wanted to get information out, there was no internet, there was no cell phones, there was no text messaging. You had to print out pamphlets, and you could maybe reach people in your small community, in your small village. We're in an interconnected world now. We're in a new world. And so we're going to have to move with those ideas. Now, Plato said 2,500 years ago that there's three kinds of people in this world now. There's lovers of honor, lovers of wisdom, and lovers of gain. Lovers of honor, lovers of wisdom, and lovers of gain. We see a lot of lovers of gain. That's where greed comes in. We see a lot of lovers of honor and vanity and influencers. We need to create a new world with lovers of wisdom, with philosophers, as he coined the term. Philo, love, Sophia, wisdom, lovers of wisdom. If that's how we create a new world, we teach people that the true measure of health, the true measure of wealth is not your bank account. It's knowledge. It's what you're doing for your species and what you're doing for mankind. And when we get people to where their basic needs are met, they're going to have those ideas. When they're not preoccupied all day long with making sure they're not, blackmailed into making sure they're not starving to death or on the street, or their kids are on the street and starving to death, they'll come with those ideas, those natural genius ideas that they have within them. And it's up to all of us to bring that out of them. Thank you.
So much there. I just really want to look at the definition of intercultural competence, because you guys touched on it about the ability to see complexity. So, it's actually a developmental process, the ability to understand your self-awareness, which I know we talked about self-awareness a little bit and how important that is, but also other awareness and cultural awareness, that everything isn't so black and white, and everything, people don't see situations from your point of view. And surprisingly, not everyone understands that, and not everyone has those skill sets and those abilities to really shift perspective. A few weeks ago, I interviewed Dr. Michael Platt. He's the author of The Leader's Brain, and he's one of the top neuroscientists in the nation. And I'm a big brain person, and I love to see what's going on in the brain. And as we deal with different people from different cultures, as we deal with our own unconscious beliefs, our own biases, and what that looks like from the leadership position. You guys are all leading, huge organizations that are global, and you all have leaders' brains. You all have a brain. What do you do as a leader with understanding how to operate with your multiple teams, with dealing with your own, unconscious beliefs and your own intercultural development? How do you in your own life gear up for such an important position, because you're leading masses who will be leading masses?
We're back to the tough question, so I'm not going to answer this one first.
Welcome to CAFFE Strategies. We make you think.
I'll jump in a little bit on that. I think for us as an NGO, our purpose, especially with our team internally and with the chapter directors, we're also trying to push the idea of why do we even exist, right? We should be upset that we exist as an organization, right? We should be working ourselves out of our job, right? We don't want to be doing this for 500 years. We don't want to be arguing about water being a human right and not being allowed to privatize for 500 years. So as far as managing teams, we want everybody to push themselves to a new threshold where we've made the competition obsolete. We've destroyed that entire industry, right? Because think about charity in itself. Think about the charity industrial complex. Why do these organizations exist? If we have a human rights crisis, and every charity ultimately boils down to human rights, right? So if there's one child dying every day in whatever country of not having water, not having food, we don't have to pony up some money and get it to some private charity. It's still publicly run, but it's a charity to make sure they can stop those children from dying. We as a community have created these things called governments. We've created these things called the Commonwealth, where we kind of have taxes and we pay it every year, and we make sure that those things aren't happening in our community. Now, unfortunately, the greedy people in the world, the super rich, the selfish people, convinced everybody through changing their meta programming, through manipulating their brain waves, which we could call hypnosis, into voting against their best interests, right? So they get these people to think that, no, we shouldn't have things like an 8-hour workday. Now, keep in mind, today is the anniversary of a big milestone in the labor movement that happened in Melbourne, Australia in 1856. Now, what happened back then was people were working 7 days a week. People were working 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours a day. And they fought and they ran with banners and they said, hey, we're going to go on strike starting on April 21st. And we're going to say we need 8 hours work, 8 hours recreation, and 8 hours rest. And that was a big, huge movement that went into May, and they won that. They were actually stonecutters at the time. So they were stonemasons in Melbourne, Australia. Now, people forget that we had to fight for these things. People, especially in the US, there's no knowledge of the labor movement. There's no knowledge of the progress that we've made. So when we're talking about progress in the future, we have to understand the history of progress in the past. That's why it sounds controversial, but we have to talk about these things if we're going to push humanity forward. Now, before we had regulations, we had children working in coal mines for 16 hours a day at 7 years old, and we're dying from fumes and toxic chemicals. And then we had to, as a community, come in and go, hey, well, maybe we should have a rule against that. Now, what we're seeing in the world today is a big argument versus negative liberty versus positive liberty. Now, let's use two examples. You have the US, negative liberty. Negative liberty can be defined as basically the freedom from something. I don't want the government or the state or the community telling me how to raise my child, or I don't want the community telling me I have to wear a face mask during a global pandemic, right? Or whatever. Okay, now positive liberty is the freedom for something. It's the freedom of the child to have the right not to be, let's say, beaten by their parents, right? So we as a community say, hey, well, positive liberty of this person, this child, should not have to work 16 hours a day in this coal mine to make sure they have some rice. We should make sure that there's a rule, there's a law, maybe 8 hours work, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. Now, people fought and died for that. So when we're talking about changing things in the future now, we have to take an account of all these things that happen. And I just wanted to bring that up.
Cool.
Justin,
go ahead. No, you talk.
Okay, I just want to say what Justin touched on just there is fundamentally we have to ask ourselves, and this is something I try to be very conscious of every day. Some days are better than others. Of asking, am I making these choices and decisions out of fear, or am I making these choices and decisions out of love? Right?
Exactly.
And is a scarcity mindset, or is it an abundant mindset? And that goes back to that shift that we're seeing globally, going from a competitive, hyper-competitive, like what Justin said, hyper-capitalistic, to a collaborative and a hyper-collaborative understanding and lens of the world in which there's a place for everybody, right? It's not a farm where you have nicely crops of corn and everybody is a crop, corn, right? It's a rainforest. Everybody, it's an intertwined ecosystem with a lot of synergies, and so that is what we need to move from. And so for me, and also I personally, this whole journey of understanding the brain and the mind has been a very near, dear to my heart, because I'm neurodiverse, and I love that terminology, that we've become more accepting of that terminology. Not only having been late diagnosed with ADHD, I also have time spatial synesthesia. So for me, I always thought that was normal until I realized, okay, hey, that synesthesia is something that's very different. So let me explore this more. And why does my brain work, or why do I see things differently than normal people, right? Or what my school deemed normal. And also working with students across the autism spectrum, working with so many different types of creative and genius in students, that it is the whole thing, it's so diverse, but the whole thing encapsulates is, how are you making your choices, right? We all see the world in different ways. Your truth is your truth and my truth is my truth, right? But fundamentally, whether it's your truth or whether it's my truth or her truth or their truth, it is about understanding, why are we motivated by what we're doing? Why are we motivated? Is it by fear? Is it by scarcity? Is it by love? Is it by abundance? If we can agree on why we're making those choices and why we're deciding it, even though our realities are different, we can come to much more agreement on how we want to define a better future.
Absolutely.
If I were to take your question on competence and how to increase competence in intercultural creativity, I'll give 3 practical things that we do in our company in how I try to cultivate it in my team, but also what I personally do all the time. And so you can take this as ideas for a company if you're leading, or for everyone who's watching and listening, something that you can do. So 3 things that we do regularly and I do regularly. So I'm not saying something I preach. This is something I personally do as well. 1, walk in the shoes of someone for a day, right? And so recently, I'm going to be super honest with these examples. I hope you don't mind. But about 3 days ago, I was impatient with my graphic designer. He had a couple things he needed to do, and he didn't hit the deadlines. My immediate thought was poor time management, hasn't figured out his rhythms, this, that. And I have to admit, and I'm super ashamed to admit this, a part of me also went, maybe the way his background, some connotations maybe with his culture. And I hate that I even had an instinct of that, because I grew up in a completely diverse world. So I was shocked I even had that feeling, but I was annoyed. And then immediately I said, hey, this is not to manage or comment or anything. I just want to see how you do your work. I actually don't know your process. I'm so focused on the product that I don't know how you do it. Can I spend a day just with you, just seeing how you go about it? And honestly, I was blown away. There's so many other layers and levels that he was bringing to a company that I had never even noticed. I didn't even know it was in him to have that perspective or the way of doing things. And it's the beauty of just, if you walk in the shoes of someone else for a day, it actually opens your eyes. What I was doing was jumping to conclusions, just looking at things on the outside. I just need to do it and to see how he was seeing the world. And I think, Bian, you were saying there's like 7 billion realities, and that's true. How do you start appreciating even one of those other realities unless you spend a day walking life in their shoes? So that's one practical thing, is go on a trip, do an experience, ask a friend, can I just see how you do life? More than just rhythms and stuff. Like, talk to me about your perspectives on these views. Like, really talk to me, which comes to my second point. Storytelling is key. I think we tell too many of a certain kind of story, and we also get comfortable hearing a certain kind of story. Like, yes, to everyone being a freelancer, but let's talk about how it's also terrible and really difficult, and it spits people out mercilessly. It is not the dream life, right? It's not for everybody. Let's talk about, like, there's another side and multiple other sides to every story. We need to start allowing for better storytelling, and not just people with influence or fame or people who have even figured it out. I want to hear the stories of people that are struggling, failing, and still, after 10 years of figuring it out, are still in the position of figuring out, because everything along the way is helpful for themselves and for others. So the second part is storytelling. Own your story, share your story. Your story is important. You don't have to be a leader or have a title. Just the fact that you are on this planet, your perspective, the way you see things is valuable. So I think storytelling is the second important thing that we can all do. And the third thing is step out of the comfort zone. The pandemic forced all of us out of our comfort zone, but even without a pandemic, just get in a habit of doing things differently. Recently, I was shopping with my dad, and he's like, oh, should I buy this new blue shirt? And I kind of laughed at him, because his entire closet is full of blue shirts. He is kind of conditioned to go to a certain part of the mall, a certain store, and a certain color and a certain rack where he gets new clothes. And I just walked him to another side. I actually showed him a picture of an older gentleman and what he was wearing. And his immediate instinct was, oh, I could never do that. And I was like, but why not? Just step out of the comfort zone, put it on. Let's see what happens. Your dad's a diplomat. He's been wearing suits from the day I was born. And we had him out in like beach shorts and a polo shirt. And it was so different. Like, for us, it was a shock as well, experiencing this changed man. But for him, now, whether he continues or not doesn't matter. Just do something different. Step out of the comfort zone. It's okay. So those are the 3 things we do in my company on a regular basis with all of my staff. We have nights where we just share stories, not work related, not deadlines related, not KPIs. Just tell me about some of the questions I ask is, what was a memory when you were 13 years old? 13 is a random number, but it forces you to go back and share a childhood story. Many of us are versions of who we are at 13, but also very different from who we are at the age of 13. And I think that's a beautiful part of admiring their transformation and who they are today and who they were. So we practice all of this in the company, but this is also something I personally do on a regular basis. And for those watching and listening, maybe one of these 3 things, try doing it, because my belief, yet to do the PhD on this still, But if you attempt to do one of these three things, your competence in intercultural creativity will grow. That's my take on it.
So I'm going to just
Excellent.
jump in there because you did hit a lot of gems and you hit a lot of my research. I haven't done my thesis yet on this, but probably be my doctoral thesis. The number one indicator of highly creative thinkers is the openness to experience. And I believe that's true for intercultural competence. Your ability to be open to the unknown is basically the foundation for you increasing your creative problem solving and just your exposure. And so it also looks at your cultural lens, as you guys spoke on in many different ways that we're experiencing the world in different ways. And at CAFFE Strategies, we have something called the diversity diamond. And I actually have a big diamond. I don't have it here with me now, but it just shows all the different facets. And I show this to my clients because I want to remind them that you're a diamond. You have all these different facets that is coloring the way that you're interacting through life. But when's the last time you really reflected on that? And so I use the example of, I didn't know LAX and all these airports had all of these nursing rooms there until I had a baby. So I added that demographic to my diamond, and suddenly my eyes opened up, and where the ramps are, because now I use a stroller all the time. So having people be aware of, you have these facets that are opening your eyes to these different things that this other person may not have. And so that's why the storytelling, the connecting, the sharing, and the empathy is so important, because now you get to as you said, put yourself in their shoes, which it plays out in so many areas, your personal life, your professional life, and so on and so forth. So as we close up, I am the diamond person, and our logo is a diamond. That's our metaphor that I teach a lot of my curriculum through. What is one last gem you want to leave with our audience about how they can be a part of the solution for a global move of intercultural creativity? Let's start with Miss B.
Oh gosh, there's so much. It's hard to just pinpoint one gem. I would say something that I say to everybody: know thyself, and that once you understand yourself, and that's a lifelong exploration. It's not a one and done. I do some self-help. I read a book and then it's done. It's a lot of layers and layers and layers of stuff. Start by understanding yourself and separating yourself from. So one easy exercise that I do and that I've seen work a lot is just something very simple that you can start doing today. And that is, ask yourself, is this voice that's telling me to do this, or this feeling, where is it coming from? Is this my mother's voice now in the back of my head? Or is it something that it's really me? And that's aligning your head, your heart, right? Your gut and your soul. Essentially, all of these various drivers, like they say, your soul is the driver, your body is the car, right? And everything else is just, the crying kids in the back asking, are we there yet? Right. And if you can allow all of that noise and just listening to yourself, meditation helps a lot. If you can pare out the noise and then just listen to that voice of who's the driver, that brings a lot of clarity. And that's just one thing to start with. If I could, I'd love to just share a quote by Bobby Kennedy. When we talked about earlier about, hypercapitalism and how there's a shift going on, this concept of this intercultural creativity comes from intercultural connectivity. And if you just have, if I can have just 30 seconds just to share this. Mm-hmm. It's so he gave this speech at University of Kansas in 1968, and he talked about how when we're measuring our GDP and our GNP, it is not something that is truly representative of who we are. So he said the GNP, I'm going to paraphrase a little bit and go to shorten it, but the GNP counts air pollution and cigarette advertising and ambulances to clear highways of carnage. It counts special locks for our doors and the jails for the people who break them. It counts the destruction of the redwood and the loss of our natural wonder and chaotic sprawl. It counts Whitman's rifle and Speck's knife and the television programs which glorify violence in order to sell toys to children. Yet the GNP does not allow for the health of our children, the quality of their education, or the joy of their play. It does not include the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages, the intelligence of our public debate, or the integrity of our public officials. It measures neither our wit nor our courage, neither our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything, in short, except that which makes life worthwhile. And it can tell us everything about America, except why we are proud that we are Americans. And if this is true here at home, it is true elsewhere in the world. So I just like to leave people with that thought about what is it when we think about intercultural creativity. Ultimately, it's about creativity, creating things that bind us, intercultural commonality and intercultural creativity to unleash that commonality. And I think that is something very worthwhile to further explore.
Excellent.
Thank you. Justin.
How are we doing on time?
We're good. I know Dan has to jump off soon.
Okay.
But so we're just going to have you and Dan wrap up, and then I close, and then that's it.
Okay, good. I'll wrap up. I had a few points I could make. But anyway, in a closing thought, I would say this. I would say there's an old Greek proverb that says a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they'll know they'll never sit under. And we know that that means that we're not here for a long time. So the ultimate secret of life is to create something better for those that come after you, for those that come after us. So anything that we're doing, no matter what we're doing, no matter how rich or powerful anybody gets, you can get hit by a bus, you can get cancer, you can die the next day. So ultimately what we're here for is to not only learn and grow individually, but to plant the seeds of a better world for all those that come after us. And those that understand that, it's my belief that they really do touch on the ultimate secret of life. Thank you.
That's good.
Thanks, Dan.
You're on mute. That's the 2020 ultimate saying, isn't it? But
it is. Follow that. Follow both of them.
This is a tough call. Okay, here's how I'll combine both of those. Okay, know thyself is so important. I think everyone's desire and mantra. It can be hard to figure that out. So where I combine that with what Justin just said is sometimes the best way to know yourself is when you start serving others. So rather than just vision boarding and daydreaming and going, this is what I see of my life, start finding out how you can serve others, how you can add value to others. What are the problems that the world has? What's the problem that your neighbors have? What's the problem that your parent or your brother, someone around you has, and solve that? Often it is in serving that we find ourselves. And so can I guess, implore those who are watching and listening that this whole topic of intercultural creativity, some of the conversation has been very abstract and philosophical, some of it has been pretty practical, but in the day, it comes down to being able to care for others, see others, appreciate others, and it starts by us, right? Right now, it's 4 people on a panel from different parts of the world joining in, but at the end of the day, you are the ambassador for this. And so how can you serve others? And in doing so, you will find yourself. Or if you are one of the blessed that knows yourself, I know for sure that that part of knowing yourself is giving yourself to others and solving the world's problems. So I don't have fancy quotes. I really wish I did, because I have grown so much from the quotes that you've all shared. But 4 words I always tell everybody: start now, start simple. Whatever you have gathered from today, whatever has inspired you today, put into action. That's all I'm going to say, because that's how we move this needle forward in these conversations. Start now, start simple.
Excellent.
Wow. See, I told you, didn't I tell you we have people watching? We have, Stephen, Delwyn, Alex, Monica, and probably a lot more people who are watching, and people will watch the replay for generations. So consider this as one of your gems that you're giving to the next generation, because you gave one of the most important resources of all, is your time and your wisdom. So I really appreciate you guys being here. Thank you so much. You guys who are watching, please go check out the Hungry Lab, check out what she's doing, go support her, go share what she's doing, reach out to her if you want to know more. She has a lot of great curriculums online. Please go check out Hustle for Humanity, which is really just changing the game in us declaring together our basic human rights and go support them. And also check out what Dan Ram is doing. He's just all over the place, flying all over the place. If you need a great speaker for your event, all of these people on this panel are great speakers and great contributors. So please check them out. I'm going to just remind you that at CAFFE Strategies, we do have trainings for corporations and organizations that work on your intercultural creativity, your self-awareness, your ability to look at bias and your diversity and inclusion goals. We also look at perspective shifting, which is a key skill for leadership today. And so go check out what we have at caffestrategies.com, CAFFE strategies.com. Thank you guys so much. Give yourselves a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Genein. You guys are awesome. That was excellent.
I just really enjoyed just being with you. And I hope, again, we can possibly do this again in the future. And just know that you guys are the epitome, the essence of intercultural creativity. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks so much, Genein. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.